There are calls for tougher legislation around illegally modified electric bicycles, which are being used to commit crimes.
Currently, anyone over the age of 14 can ride an e-bike at speeds of up to 15 miles an hour, but police are warning of a large number of bikes being converted to travel much faster. Our reporter Hannah Walsh has more.
The consequences of the illegal use of e-bikes. This rider was captured knocking over a teenager on the Isle of Wight. She wasn't seriously hurt. In Poole, the neighbourhood policing team have been increasing patrols to catch offenders. It didn't take long before two teenagers were seen riding through a residential area.
Along Russell Gardens, two young males, one sat astride the forearm, dressed in black, hoodie up.
Obviously sees this bike, we've shown it can get up to about 45 miles an hour. It's especially dangerous, and what we've also now learnt from talking to the young people involved in riding this and from looking at the bike is it's got no brakes. So there's people going around up to speeds of 45 miles an hour with no brakes.
It's a big danger to everyone involved. We're quite often seeing them on high streets in busy populated areas. We saw earlier how fast those bikes go, some of them in excess of 40 miles an hour, some faster than that. That the majority, like I said, are untrained people on these bikes.
As well as targeted patrols, Dorset Police are trialling a forensic spray to mark riders who may be committing antisocial behaviour.
This is a forensic spray in a can. Every can is uniquely identifiable. If an officer out on patrol has cause to deploy it, then they'd seize that can. We then look to carry out that investigation to identify the individuals responsible for that kind of behaviour. And as part of that investigation, we would look to be seizing and swabbing clothing and bikes, sending that off for forensic testing. And there's absolutely no doubt that that bike is the one that's seen by that officer at that time. So it's specifically unique to that individual case.
Julie Whitecross from Fareham has suffered tragedy because of an illegal e-bike. Earlier this year, her husband Lee was walking their dog Safi when it was hit and killed by an e-bike rider.
Went whizzing by. Next minute, Safi screamed. We can only imagine that he's either kicked her as he's gone by or he's turned the bike wheel. My hubby was absolutely horrified, as you can imagine. She just looked up at him for a few seconds and she just died in his arms, which is really difficult to think that she loves people and somebody took her life.
Back in Poole, the illegal e-bikes are seized, collected and brought to Eastleigh in Hampshire, where they're crushed.
This is really completing the journey. Our communities don't want these in their community. They don't want the antisocial behaviour attached to it, and it's really sending out that message that this is something we're not going to tolerate.
A lot of the time we will post on social media about our seizures. A lot of the replies will be, you don't do anything about it or you give them back. This today shows that they're not going back to the people that are riding it and causing antisocial behaviour, and this is the final outcome.
Current laws state e-bikes can only assist a rider whilst they're pedalling, and only up to 15.5 miles per hour. The motor is limited to 250 watts. Bournemouth MP Tom Hayes is campaigning for tougher laws around the use of e-bikes.
I'm calling on the government to introduce mandatory registration and licensing. I'm calling on the government to have harsher import controls and to make sure, because people are concerned about battery safety, that we've got the highest standard of battery safety too.
The government says there are strict regulations for e-bikes, and if these aren't met, the bikes will be seized.
Hannah Walsh reporting there. We can speak now to the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for the Thames Valley, Matthew Barber. Matthew Barber, good morning to you.
Good morning.
We saw there the impact that these bikes, illegally modified, can have, the impact they can have on people. What powers do you have at the moment to stop those who are using these bikes, forget not just for crimes, but just for cycling around beyond the speed limits they're supposed to be at?
So the powers are there for the police to seize the illegally modified e-bikes, but of course, having a power doesn't make it practically easy. Obviously, if you're a police officer out and about and you see someone on an e-bike, you won't necessarily know that e-bike has been modified until it's already travelling at excessive speeds, at which point you've got to try and stop that person, detain them, seize the bike, which is why you've seen Dorset Police using that forensic spray. I think the issues around registration are really interesting because, of course, if you're driving your car, most of the offences that people will be caught by poor driving when they're driving a car will actually be linked with their registration. You'll get a letter through the post later. You're identified by the police because of your registration. We don't have that on e-bikes or e-scooters. That is a real challenge, I think, for policing and something the government should be looking at. And in terms of registration, what efforts have been or what interaction has there been with the government or response when it comes to that suggestion? Well, at the moment, the government seem quite resistant to it. I think there is a challenge about some in the cycling lobby who are concerned that the registration sort of moves into push bikes. But I think there is definitely a need for a wholesale look at the legislation around this. Not just about e-bikes. There's e-bikes, there's e-scooters, which of course are illegal to use if they're privately owned. But if they're part of a council scheme, then they can be insured. So they are allowed. And a lot of people say, well, why can't I just get my own insurance for one? Those trials were there exactly as that, trials. So the government needs to decide, are they going to accept the results of those trials and change the law to allow them to be more readily used. And we've also got at the other end mopeds, maybe a little bit less common now we have e-bikes, but delivery drivers using mopeds to deliver with just on a provisional license without having even passed a driving test in order to use that for work. So I think we need to look at all of these in the round. But of course, it's not just about the vehicles. The police enforcement is very much about the type of vehicle that's being used. It's the behaviour of individuals on them. There are lots of people who can ride a legal e-bike perfectly reasonably and safely, and they're very good ways of getting around congested towns and cities. But we've got individuals who are riding recklessly and dangerously, and that's the bit that we really need to tackle because it's just dangerous behaviour.
Good morning, Mr. Barber. It's Charlie in the studio here. Just curious about the manufacturers, either of the bikes themselves or of those kits that are used to adapt. Do you think enough is being done to check what they're manufacturing, what they're making available?
No, I think that's absolutely part of the problem about what are the import controls, what are the controls on sale of these things, particularly the kits for modification, because we need to be stopping this at source. It's very much like the e-scooter problem, where you can go into Halfords or Currys, spend a few £100s and buy an e-scooter, and as soon as you take it out the store, you've got nowhere in public that you can legally ride it. That not unreasonably causes some confusion for the public. If I can get hold of it, why can't I use it? And I think we need clarity from the government on this. I'm not instinctively someone who wants to ban things, but what we do need is to make sure that the regulation actually matches the intent. And at the moment, we have a real concern in many communities about the way these vehicles are being used. They're definitely linked in many cases to criminality, and yet the legislation just hasn't caught up.
I just wonder what your personal experience is. Have you been in situations where you felt, a risk from one of these e-bikes going too fast? And also, I just wonder what you recommend people do. If they're in a situation they see someone doing that, what should you do?
Well, I would say certainly if you've got any footage, any mobile phone footage, if you've got a description of someone, I would say report those to the police. In Thames Valley, we've increased the number of seizures, 118 just in the last month. That is starting to make a difference, but we can't just enforce our way out of it. And I think many people will have seen that experience of people riding on pavements through pedestrian areas dangerously, recklessly. I have to say it's not just about e-bikes. It can be push bikes as well. That's why I think it's the behaviour that we need to look at. But we do know there are a group of people who will illegally modify these bikes. You've seen in that clip some of the dangerous modifications that people will make. Vehicles travelling at 40 plus miles an hour with no brakes. They'll be riding through residential areas. That is inherently dangerous, and it's something the police need to tackle.
Matthew Barber, we've spoken on this programme over the years about mopeds, and criminals on mopeds kind of dashing through towns, snatching phones, being used for crime. Are e-bikes now replacing these because they are cheaper?
Absolutely. It's a vehicle of choice for criminals, and that's why I think we need to have a look in the legislation at that wider piece. I don't think we should ignore mopeds. They are still they're still an issue. That point about being able to ride one for deliveries with just a provisional licence. But this is why we need to look at it, because it's not just about road safety, important though that is. And I don't want to stop people using e-bikes and e-scooters legally to commute around town. But we have to recognise they are used quite significantly by criminals, whether that's the phone snatching, whether that's for drug dealing, and they create a challenge for the police to enforce against. So we need the legislation to match the police action on the ground in order to deal with those people who will be dangerous and criminal using these vehicles, and allow those people who want to use them for getting around to be able to do so safely and legally.
Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner for the Thames Valley, thank you very much for your time with us here on BBC Breakfast.